I'm Connie Empress, Communications Manager here at New Buildings Institute. Before we begin, I have a couple of housekeeping things to tell you about. First, you are muted and we cannot hear you. This helps keep the background noise down so that everyone can better hear the speakers. I want to direct you to the dashboard that you should be able to see on the right-hand side of your screen. If you are having technical difficulties and cannot see the slides or hear our speakers, you can use this question pane in the dashboard to let us know and we will help you as we go. Please ask questions in this question pane as they come up. We will take a few questions at the end of each speaker's presentations. At the end of the webinar session, you will be given the opportunity to take a short survey. Tomorrow, you will receive a follow-up email with links to the recording and slides for this session. Today's panel will be introduced by NBI's Program Director, Amy Cortez. Amy, I'll pass it over to you.
Great, thank you, Connie. Welcome everyone to this webinar about the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code updates. Connie, if you want to slip to the next slide. We are, as many of you know, the IECC update process is a year-long process where we are now just before an important deadline, which happens next Monday, where governmental members who have the power to move local energy codes forward by influencing this national process, they can register or validate their voters so that they're ready to vote in November. Connie, this is really important because energy codes have a number of important benefits. Connie, if you'll switch the slide, please. Energy codes are a really important policy mechanism that can help lower utility bills and reduce risks to energy burden households and businesses and communities. So we know that energy codes help lead to healthier homes and buildings with better indoor air quality, and they're going to help local and state governments achieve their energy and climate goals. So the way energy codes can do this is by aligning manufacturers with advanced practices, which can help reduce costs everywhere, even where the International Energy Conservation Code may not be the one that's in effect. And it's really an important mechanism to improve and improve our energy independence, because buildings do use about 40% of all primary energy and about 70% of electricity. We've assembled a wonderful panel today to tell us a little bit more about specific proposals to know about in this important vote for the climate. Bill Fay is going to kick it off and tell us a little bit more about the process that we'll see in addition to this deadline coming up next Monday. Bill Fay has led the Energy Efficient Codes Coalition since 2007. IECC has a united and unique support base to advance the development and adoption of building energy codes that put America on a glide path of dynamic building efficiency gains. IECC has helped boost the residential and commercial building efficiency of the America's Model Energy Code, this IECC, and has worked with state and local jurisdictions to support its adoption. After that, Bill's going to pass it off to Eric Lacey, and Eric is the chairman of the Responsible Energy Codes Alliance. This is a broad coalition of energy efficiency professionals, regional organizations, product and equipment manufacturers, trade associations, and environmental organizations that promote the adoption and implementation of the IECC nationwide. In his 13 years as chairman, Eric has been involved in the development of the IECC in the IECC code development process and has been involved in code adoption efforts around the country. Eric serves as a member of the EECC's technical committee, which researches and develops the EECC's code change proposals. And then Eric's going to talk, Eric Lacey is going to talk about the residential proposals, and then we'll take a couple questions and then pass it off to Eric Makala, who's Associated Director at New Buildings Institute, to talk about some of the commercial proposals. So Eric Makla has over 30 years of building energy codes experience throughout the United States as well as abroad. He supports NBI's broader engagement in code development with an emphasis on REACH and stretch codes and multifamily code adoption. And he also serves on the IECC technical committee. So with those brief introductions, I'm going to pass it off now to Bill Fay.
Thank you, Amy. I appreciate the introduction. It's much nicer than I think that I am, but it was very nice of you to say so. Let's talk about the 2021 IECC, because this is actually a get out the vote effort, because getting out the vote is going to drive the transition of the IECC to net zero buildings in America. Next slide. And so here's where we are. We started out when IECC was first formed, and we have a very broad membership. It has not only the environmental community and manufacturers, low-income housing and consumer groups, and insurance and labor and virtually everybody, state energy offices and others that support efficiency. But for about 20 years, you'll see the flat line at the top that went through the 2006 IECC. In that 20-year period or 25-year period, there really was not much improvement in the energy code from during every 3-year update. And we really knew we had to change that. America's builders were doing a phenomenal job building more efficient buildings, and a lot of jurisdictions were doing better. We had Builders Challenge at DOE. We had Energy Star. We had the USGBC really driving this, but we didn't have a nationwide program to really make a difference. And so in 2 code cycles, we essentially got about 38% boost in residential efficiency, about 35% boost in commercial building efficiency, and that you can see the benefits that gain had on not only primary energy savings for homeowners and occupants, but the energy savings and carbon emissions that we avoided. And now the question is, how do we proceed? Because the last 2 code cycles, we've gone back to that flat line of 1% improvements every 3 years, and that just isn't enough. And a lot of our leaders in the country have said they want more. And so next slide. U.S. Conference of Mayors really have gotten involved in this, and I think one of the big drivers has been the carbon savings, and the fact that not only does this put a lot of money in the wallets of people who own and occupy buildings, but it also is going to have a tremendous impact on carbon emissions. So it's a win-win. In fact, if you were to take all the proposals offered by IECC and its supporters, it would be a 50 million ton reduction in carbon by 2030. Next slide. And so that's what's caused the aha moments. We've had 4 of them, actually. The first one was when McKinsey and company back in the last decade determined that energy efficiency was one of the most cost-effective measures anybody could take to reduce carbon emissions in the United States. And of course, and the one thing they noticed about it is that it had a negative cost. That is, the amount of money that it puts in the wallets of people that own buildings quickly recoups any added cost of the efficiency improvements. Secondly, the U.S. Conference of Mayors just last year passed a resolution, and it was like an aha moment for them, because they realized that they'd been fighting for over a decade to try to lead the effort to reduce carbon emissions, but they also have been supporting efforts to make America's Model Energy Code, the IECC, more efficient. And that aha moment was when they linked the 2 of those in a very profound resolution that they adopted unanimously. And then they went a little further than that, and Mayor LeVar Stoney of Richmond sent his sustainability officer to speak to the ICC Board of Directors. what she said to them, to the ICC board, was that we as jurisdictions need more. We need more out of our building energy codes, and we need more out of the IECC. We're all trying to go beyond where the IECC is now, and we'd really like to have the IECC do that. And then the fourth aha moment was just this July 1st, when the U.S. Conference of Mayors not only endorsed a 10% boost in the efficiency of the IECC this November, it encouraged jurisdictions to maximize their voting clout and through multiple memberships, and also through making sure that they'd registered all of their voting representatives. And I think what they're trying to say is let's start with the 10% boost in efficiency, and then let's put the IECC, the 2021 and future IECCs on a glide path to net zero. Next slide. What we have today is, and you're going to hear this, we have United Efficiency Community. We had earlier this year, Amy showed the chart of what's happened. We had better, more pro-efficiency residential and commercial energy committees. We had the growing sense of urgency that was in the mayor's resolution coming about when the IPCC said that we needed to act quickly. And then we also have efforts to really reach out to building officials and the fire officials that are out there. Next slide. So the pieces are falling into place. We have you're going to hear about a very strong slate of proposals. I mean, I think the thing about any election is you have to have good candidates, right? And we do. If you take a look at listen to the candidates, which are the proposals that you'll be voting on, or that governmental members will be voting on this November. In addition to that, we had multiple governmental memberships in jurisdictions have actually improved that communication between the policy of the jurisdiction and also the IECC. And then we had outstanding committee results earlier this year. Next slide. Now we have a voting guide that's also endorsed in the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and it's a very simple yardstick that we use for our voting guide. By and large, it's based on a set of guiding principles, and those are listed under there. We don't support rollbacks, for example, and in fact, we recommend against voting against all rollbacks. But even when a proposal improves efficiency, we first assure that it uses readily available technology, it's cost effective. And then if there are competing proposals, we pick the one that's best no matter who wrote it. Next slide. Now you're going to hear when you see our voting guide, you're going to see it's broken, especially the top priority voting guide will be broken into four categories. The first one is the big energy savers. You're going to hear about that from the two Erics. Secondly, individual improvements that are going to improve various elements of the building. And then there are hard to quantify improvements. For example, if you improve the testing requirements, you also improve the compliance. It doesn't get you a set amount of percentage that you can estimate, but it does definitely make sure that the building is more likely to pass. Zero energy appendices and EV ready are another one. Next slide. And so what's left for the year? Well, as of Monday, governmental members are going to have submitted their roster of voting representatives. GMVRs are governmental member voting representatives, and each governmental member is entitled to 4, 8, or 12 of those, depending upon their population. So we're urging the maximization of those governmental member voting representatives, and that has to be done by Monday. On October 23rd to the 30th, and more specifically from the 26th to the 30th, we're going to have hearings in Las Vegas on to debate and discuss and make presentations on public comments to ICC. And then lastly, tentatively between the 13th and the 27th, the IECC will open up a 2-week voting window, and this is an online voting window, and we encourage that. This is when all of those governmental member voting representatives need to act. Next slide. So it's crunch time, and this is the same thing. So let's go to the next slide after that. You'll see these 3 milestones that are really important. By the way, one of the things I wanted to mention is that if you want to know how to register your people by Monday, you can just go on our website, IECC's energyefficientcodes.org, and you will be able to watch the Boston City Council sign up its governmental member voting representatives. Later this year, we'll also, in addition to the voting guide, have a codes carbon calculator that will take our top priority recommendations, and it will tell you what your jurisdiction, whether it's a state or a metropolitan area, is going to save in terms of carbon and criteria pollutant savings. So get in touch with us. Let us know if you have any questions, and that's the end of my part of this presentation. Any questions?
Great, thanks, Bill. I'm not seeing any questions yet, but a quick reminder to everybody, if you do have questions, feel free to put them into the question pane, and we will be sure. All right, so a couple are coming in now. So one is, a question is whether the carbon calculator includes embodied carbon, or if it's just operational carbon.
Wow, great question. I'm not going to do the carbon calculator, but I will find out. ICF International has done that for us. It is what it does is it just takes the works with federal government data, and maybe one of the Erics will know the answer to this, but works with government data on housing and building stock, new building stock, and then it applies those improvements that we recommend and calculates how much of a carbon impact would be less. One of the things that had not been mentioned earlier is that buildings are also the largest segment for carbon emissions in the United States. 39% of our carbon emissions come from buildings. I will get that answer and we'll send it out to everybody.
Great. And then the other question is about the timing on the guides. When will they be available?
We are going to have the guide. Our technical committee has just started delving into the public comments. Now, there were about 125 public comments that we saw, and we've got to understand those before we do our voting guide. I would suspect in the next 2 to 3 weeks we'll be releasing the voting guide for the public comment hearing. Now, what happens at the public comment hearing will define what's on the actual online ballot. And so we can't really do our online ballot recommendations until after the completion of the public comment hearing on the 30th of October. And so we're going to be on a very fast pace between October 30th and the 13th of November, when we expect to see the online voting going, to make sure that everyone gets a copy of our online voting guide. The voting guide for the public comment hearing, however, will be done probably in 2 to 3 weeks. Our priority proposals, our top priority proposals that will be discussed by the Erics that are in a minute, I think are going to be fairly well understood, and I think you may see some information about those top priorities earlier than the publishing of the voting guide for the public comment hearings.
Okay, well, thanks for that. And I don't have any other questions at this time. So why don't we pass it off to Eric Lacey to dive into some of the residential proposals.
Great, thank you. And Bill, I thought that was a good tee up for this process. The technical committee spends hours and hours and hours reviewing and making recommendations on the proposals, and I'm sure they're not going to put something out until it's ready to go. But as Bill mentioned, some of these proposals, we already have a pretty good idea of what our position is going to be on them, because it's the same position we took in the first round. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through some of the proposals that I think are most significant on the residential side, and then Eric Makala is going to cover the CE proposals, mostly commercial proposals. And so you're going to advance to the next slide. just to give folks a sense of where we are in the process, we've already gone through the committee process where the IECC Residential Committee voted in favor of or against a number of proposals. The good news is that the committee largely rejected the proposals that would have taken us a big step backwards. So the good news around that is that some of those really egregious proposals would need to have 2/3 support in order to become part of the 2021 IECC. And so unlike previous cycles where we've been kind of fending off really significant rollback proposals, this time there's only a couple of them that I would consider real threats. And so we're in a pretty good position in terms of keeping the current efficiency in place. Nothing's a guarantee. Our opponents may, put together a big campaign and get a 2/3 vote together and steamroll the efficiency voices. But I think we're in generally a good position to at least keep the code at the current level of efficiency. The flip side of that, though, is that the Residential Committee did not adopt very many substantial improvements to the code. And that's where we need to get 2/3 votes to get any of these improvements incorporated into the code. And just for to give you a sense of the scale, there are 200 or so proposals between the RE and CE, depending on how you count them, that are going to be heard in October. We think it's going to be between about October 26th and 30th. It's the RE and CE are the last sets of proposals that are going to be heard, so it's going to depend on how long the other codes take to debate, but we're guessing October 26th through 30th. There were, a few hundred public comments that were submitted, and so the result is that at the public comment hearing, there'll be roughly 200 proposals that will be heard. So let's go to the next slide. I've tried to break this down into 4 sort of categories. If you were looking at these proposals in terms of where can I get the biggest bang for the buck, that's the first category, the big energy savers. The second category is proposals to individual pieces of the code. Maybe it's an insulation improvement or a window efficiency improvement or something like that. These are individual improvements that will have a good impact on energy efficiency, but nothing like 5 to 10%. You might see 1% or 0.5% or something. These improvements all add up to the impact that Bill outlined earlier, where you get substantial reductions in carbon. The third category is other improvements to the code that are harder to quantify. It might be an appendix that we think is useful. It might be other sensible improvements that will help advance the goals of energy efficiency on a broader scale, even if the immediate impact isn't quantifiable. And you'll understand that when we get there. And the fourth category is the rollback proposals. Whenever people ask, what are the highest priority proposals? I'm always tempted to put the rollbacks first, because I buy into the theory of do no harm first. We want to make sure that we at least maintain the efficiency of the current code before we get some improvements. But as the public comment hearing works, we need to be working on both priorities at the same time. On one hand, we're going to be pushing for big changes and improvements in efficiency. On the other hand, we're trying to avoid getting flanked by opponents to energy efficiency. So to kick things off on the next slide, I want to talk about the biggest energy savers, and I included 4 in here. And I'll just say at the outset here that we're still in the process of going through all the proposals. We may add or subtract some of these proposals from kind of the high priority lists, but these are the proposals that stood out to me as having the biggest impact. And there's no surprise here. It's the IECC and NBI that are putting forward the proposals that will have the biggest overall improvement in the codes. The RE 206, 207, and 209 are 3 approaches to getting a code improvement while leaving the current code structure intact. So in other words, we take the 2018 IECC and then add on top of it a system similar to what Oregon and Washington and Vermont and a few other states have, where you pick from a list of additional efficiency improvements, or you pick improvements that would earn a certain number of points and use that to get you to full code compliance. there's several advantages to this, and let's advance to the next slide, and I'll come back to the fourth proposal later. Some of the advantages of this, obviously this is a big way of getting energy efficiency improvements, but it also allows maximum flexibility. It may be that a builder has a good set of mechanical efficiency improvements that they tend to favor, and they'll get credit for that in the points package. It may be that a builder has an innovative wall system or a conditioned attic or some other measure that they favor, that they found to be cost effective and feasible and so on. These approaches will allow you more flexibility. And so there are a couple of different versions of this. We have a very straightforward pick one package sort of approach, which is RE209, where you have 5 or 6 options and you pick one of those and go forward with it. It's similar to what we have in the commercial IECC right now. RE206 and 207 have a more flexible approach, a little more complex, where you get a certain number of points for a certain different types of improvements, and you incorporate one or more of these to come up with the requisite number of points. And so we are leaving it up to the voters as to which approach they prefer, and any of these would improve the code substantially. The other thing that I personally like about this, because of the work I do with code adoption, is even if a jurisdiction is stuck on an earlier version of the IECC, you could take this new section and plop it into your code, whatever it is, and still get that 5%, 10% improvement in efficiency. And so it's designed so that it's kind of an add-on turnkey approach to improving efficiency. And as you might have guessed, it's also scalable, just like Washington and Oregon and Vermont and DC and other places that have these sorts of approaches have shown us. When you want to improve efficiency, you can increase the number of points that are required. And that's very useful, because we're creating a model code here, or updating a model code, and the model code that's demanded in some parts of the country may be very different than what is demanded in others. Some jurisdictions are driving forward towards net zero energy. Other jurisdictions are taking their time. So this is designed to be scalable to fit those needs. You can advance to the next slide. The next slide is just real simply RE192, which was the 4th major big energy saver. And that is an EECC proposal that improves the energy rating index thresholds. In 2015, the IECC added a new compliance path called the energy rating index, which is basically you get a HERS score and meet other mandatory requirements and a minimum thermal envelope efficiency requirement, and you comply with the code. And again, this adds a lot of flexibility. The numbers you see in front of you are the original 2015 IECC numbers, which are a little more efficient than what we have in the 2018 IECC. And so again, this would strengthen the ERI scores by something in the range of 5 to 10%. So those are the big energy saving proposals, kind of the major improvements. So if you advance to the next slide, I'm going to run through some of the individual improvements, and some in more detail than others, because I think these are pretty straightforward. RE7 is an NBI proposal that improves the lighting efficacy requirements. It's a very straightforward improvement. I know there's been a couple of public comments submitted trying to offer some fine tuning to this. This is one proposal that we're excited about, because it will add some very simple energy efficiency. And we think that the nation is largely moving in this direction anyway, if you look at any of the data on the types of lighting that people are incorporating into new homes and existing homes. So that's RE7. Then there's a group of EECC proposals that are incremental improvements in the insulation and fenestration, windows and doors requirements. RE29, 32, 33, and 36 all improve individual pieces of the opaque envelope, the insulation requirements that go into a new residential home. And if you advance to the next slide, you get a good sense of the impact. Almost every climate zone would be improved, and some climate zones, like climate zones 4 and 5, would be improved across several different categories. Each of these proposals has been found to be cost-effective and feasible, and we're confident that altogether these proposals will substantially improve the efficiency of the building. They've been broken up into individual proposals, largely for strategic reasons, because it's a lot easier to get individual provisions adopted than one giant proposal. But add it all together, we would see substantial energy savings, and not just in the short term. These are improvements that would last for the lifetime of the home, sometimes 100 years if you think of insulation. The other improvement that I would highlight is the fenestration improvements. RE35 was an EECC proposal that improves fenestration U factors in climate zones 2 through 4. This one was actually approved by the IECC Residential Committee for inclusion in the 2021 IECC. There has been a public comment filed on this one, so it's going to be reheard in October, but it did have pretty broad support, and we're optimistic that it'll be incorporated into the code in the end. So I'm going to move forward. Let's go to the next slide. The next set of improvements are the ones that are a little harder to quantify. We're constantly looking at the code and tweaking provisions that may not be obvious energy savers to a casual observer, but that we think will substantially improve the code. The first of these is RE37. This is an SHGC, the solar heat gain coefficient requirement in climate zone 5, which currently doesn't have a requirement for low solar heat gain in windows. This one is a good one because it will save the homeowner and the home builder money, because they'll be able to put in smaller equipment for cooling in these buildings. There's quite a bit of air conditioning that goes on in climate zone 5. If you think of Pennsylvania north, they still have pretty hot summers, and there's still a benefit to putting in low SHGC windows. This proposal would put in a pretty modest requirement in there, which we believe is largely where the market is going on this. RE112 was an EECC proposal that was approved by the Residential Energy Committee. It's on this list because there were public comments filed on it, so we need to relitigate it. But RE112 came out of our review of the DOE field study data, where we found that where a builder knows that they're going to be tested on duct leakage, the leakage of the ducts, or the efficiency, is pretty good. Where a duct system is exempt from testing and verification, we found duct tightness was about half as good. It was leaking twice as much. So what RE112 does is it just says all duct systems need to be tested, even if the ducts are all located inside conditioned space. I know in my home, all the ducts are located inside conditioned space. When I first moved into the home, I realized that the conditioned air was not reaching out into all the homes in the house. It was an incredibly leaky system, and the furnace room was the best conditioned room in the whole house. And so RE112 would help prevent that from happening. RE115, which was also approved by the committee, I believe, sets a maximum trade-off cap for duct leakage. Right now, you can trade off duct leakage to infinity if you want, as long as you make up for it elsewhere in the building. This sets a maximum trade-off cap at 8 CFM for duct leakage, so that there's some level of efficiency incorporated. CE217, there's a part 1 and part 2 to this proposal, a commercial and residential component. These proposals would add EV-ready, EV-capable requirements to residential buildings, multifamily, and commercial buildings. Again, are there direct energy savings from this? You could argue that, but this is a proposal kind of looking over the long term at the direction things are going, and trying to future-proof our homes a little bit. And then RE223, you can go ahead and advance to the next slide. I've included a table from that proposal. This is an NBI NRDC proposal that adds a zero energy residential buildings appendix. What I love about this proposal is that it takes the current energy rating index path and just layers on top of that a lower set of ERI numbers and some other requirements to prepare these homes to achieve net zero energy. Of all the zero energy appendices, this is the one that's the most complete, and I think the best shot for energy efficiency and net zero energy. So that's proposal RE223. If you advance to the next slide, I want to get into the biggest rollback proposals. And the very first one here is RE17, which was the only, I think, significant rollback proposal that was actually approved by the Residential Energy Committee. And it's one that that we believe could incorporate a big new loophole in the code. We understand generally what the proponents are trying to do here. They're trying to make a new compliance method that's based on the load calculation that's done for heating and cooling. The problem is the proposal is incomplete. There's a lot of there's a real risk of mischief with this proposal, and there were a bunch of public comments filed on this because I think folks recognized that it was not complete and needed a lot of work, and I think we're going to recommend disapproval on it because it does need so much work still. And so RE17 is probably the most significant proposal that was approved by the Residential Energy Committee that we're going to recommend disapproving. The next several of these proposals were actually disapproved by the committee, which was good because that means we just need to make sure our opponents don't get together a 2/3 majority to overrule the committee on these. Several of these deal with the performance path. Right now, the performance path doesn't give credit, free trade-off credit for things like renewable energy, heating and cooling equipment, water heating equipment, and other things, for good reason, because even though the efficiency of those components is important, the code can't really require the efficiency because of federal preemption. And so historically what we saw with the code was in the states where you had incorporated trade-offs for equipment efficiency, builders were using that credit to trade away the permanent features of the home. Think the insulation and fenestration efficiency and the efficiency of systems. And so in the 2012 IECC, all of these sorts of trade-offs were eliminated from the code, and almost every state has eliminated these trade-offs as well. There are several proposals submitted to try to get some of these trade-offs and things like them back in. RE156 puts in a trade-off for on-site power production. And I don't want folks to misunderstand this. We're all in favor of on-site power production, but not at the expense of energy efficiency. I can't think of a more clear way of saying that. We can't get to net zero energy if we're allowing folks to waste all the energy that we've been trying to save for all these years. And we're not going to get there if we're taking the new renewable energy that's being generated and allowing builders to waste even more energy as a result. RE161 creates a loophole in the performance path by adding skylights to the base case home. This is another one, I guess, that was approved by the committee. It's complicated. The bottom line, though, is that it creates this new loophole that gives credit where credit shouldn't be given. On the next slide, you'll see a few more of the biggest rollbacks. RE176 and RE208 both give performance path trade-offs for heating, cooling, and water heating equipment. RE208 has an additional element, and that is that it has a points-based compliance path attached to it that sort of looks and sounds like the flex points proposal we discussed earlier. There are some problematic elements to this points path. It's going to be very difficult to update. It's going to kind of lock in place some of the current efficiency of the code. There's some other components of this that we had some concerns with. So we're recommending whether it has the equipment trade-off or not in it, we're probably going to recommend disapproving this. CE 54 Part 2 doesn't apply to much of the lower 48, but it does institute weaker provisions for the tropical climate zone. Hawaii and Puerto Rico and some of the other islands in the tropical zone. On the next slide, which is my last slide, there are some additional rollbacks to individual components and systems. Again, none of these would amount to a 5 or 10 or 15% rollback, but still altogether they would take us backwards in efficiency. We don't see any reason to roll back. RE40 allows you to reduce wall insulation R value from R20 to R18 if you have a lower framing factor. We think you should do both. You think you should have a lower framing factor where you can to improve the efficiency of the wall, but we don't think you should reduce the amount of insulation in the wall. There's no need to create more space here for an efficiency improvement. RE119 allows you to test duct leakage outdoors instead of a total leakage test. We feel like that's incomplete because it still doesn't give the homeowner or the builder a good sense of how much of the conditioned air is actually reaching the intended parts of the building. RE190 and RE196 deal with the thermal envelope backstop that applies to the energy rating index. As I mentioned earlier, the energy rating index is the compliance option where you get a HERS score basically to comply with the code. But one important piece of this is that the insulation and the windows, the permanent aspects of the building that are going to be there the longest have to achieve a certain level of efficiency. And both of these proposals would roll back that envelope backstop from where it is currently. So we're going to recommend disapproving those. And then finally, RE217 creates a new exception from roof replacement insulation requirements. This is an issue that's come up in a couple of states recently. The 2015 IECC and the 2018 IECC both include what we think is very clear language as to how to treat low slope roofs and when you're replacing roofing materials above some of these, most often multifamily roofs and commercial roofs. It's a rare opportunity to improve the efficiency of the building after it's already been built. And we'd hate to see that opportunity weakened or to create a whole new exception from it that we think could be exploited. So that's a very quick run through of the proposals. You can advance to the next slide if you want. Here are some email addresses and websites. I know we kind of dived off into the weeds talking about some of these proposals. And there's many more where these came from, but our attempt today was just to cover those that we think are most significant and could have the biggest impact either positively or negatively in the efficiency of the 2021 IECC. So I will ask if there are any questions and pause right there.
Great, thanks, Eric. We do have a couple of questions that have come in, and one came in while you were talking about the envelope and systems, and the question was actually a clarification. The question is, did you say that the 2018 IECC had less efficient scores than the 2015 IECC? And that the proposal would actually bring 2021 back in line to the more efficient numbers that were in 2015. Is that correct?
That's great, yeah. Yeah, someone's paying really close attention, I'm glad. Yeah, here's how it happened. The 2015 IECC incorporated the scores, kind of the original set of ERI scores that you'll see in proposal RE192. And they were, in the low 50s, basically. Now, in 2018 IECC, there were a number of changes made to the ERI, and as part of a broader compromise, which included better thermal envelope backstops to the energy rating index, those scores were increased up into the high 50s, low 60s. And so, yes, the code in that respect took a small step backwards in terms of the energy rating index score. As I said, there were other improvements made that we felt like were, kind of a fair trade-off there. But the energy rating index scores were never intended to stay the same forever. And so when we were looking for a reasonable improvement to the energy rating index scores this cycle, we thought it made sense to reincorporate those scores that had already been in the code and which had already been adopted in several states, the 2015 IECC. They were part of the DOE determination in the 2015 IECC and so on. And so, we felt like it was a reasonable step towards more efficiency. But yeah, the listener is correct that there was a step backwards in the ERI scores themselves in the 2018 as part of the broader ERI compromise.
Okay. And then there's another question about asking about the proposed U factors for climate zone 3's fenestration.
Yeah, hold on. So the proposal number is RE35, and RE35 improves the fenestration U factor in climate zone 3 and climate zone 4 from a 0.32 to a 0.30 if they're looking for this specific improvement. Currently, the U factor requirement in climate zones 5, 6, 7, and 8 is already 0.30, and this would stretch that U factor down into climate zones 3 and 4 as well. Again, looking at the DOE field study data, we found that a lot of windows are already meeting or exceeding that U factor, and we felt like it was the next logical step for these climate zones. We found that this saved energy, it was cost effective. I should add one other element to this proposal is that where fenestration is required to meet windborne debris protection, or if you're installing windows above 4,000 feet, this proposal adds a new footnote that allows you to keep those U factors at 0.32 instead of 0.30. We reached out to the fenestration industry and found that, you know, in high elevation situations, think, you know, Colorado or Aspen, where they're trying to get to a low U factor, when you ship windows up and over some of these elevations, sometimes you need to put a capillary breather tube in or some other measure to make sure that the windows stay structurally sound and don't crack. And so there's a provision written in here where if you're shipping over these high altitude locations, you're allowed to put in a 0.32 instead of a 0.30. Maybe this is more detailed than the commenter was looking for, but I thought it was a good opportunity to talk about this new footnote, which in another proposal was also approved and will likely be part of the 2021 IECC.
Okay, great. All right, well, we'll continue. We do have a couple more questions. Some of them are more process, but I want to make sure Eric Makala has time to talk about some of the commercial, and then we do have some time at the end for more questions. So with that, why don't we pass it off to Eric Makala from NBI.
Great, thanks, Amy, and thanks, Eric. I think Eric and Bill did a good job of teeing us off into the commercial provisions. And Eric's, you know, we're actually in agreement with all of Eric's comments actually on the residential side. From an NBI perspective, we have had a chance to review all of the public comments right now. Our overall impression is we thought the IECC Commercial Code Development Committee did a great job in approving proposals that strengthen the code, and not all proposals were approved, but we thought they were selective in what they approved, and the proposals they approved made sense, and they disapproved proposals that didn't make sense, even though it might have strengthened the code slightly. But we were I think overall very happy about what happened at the hearings. And, you know, as part of this process goes, that those that did not like the committee decisions obviously are going to be submitting public comments, and that's just the way it is. And some of them had good points as far as the public comments go. What I'm planning on doing here in the next half an hour is to kind of go through what we felt were the strongest proposals from an energy saving standpoint. We don't have time to go through every proposal out there, and there were other proposals that certainly strengthened it from an implementation standpoint, so clarified the code and that type of thing. Or brought in other features, but we don't unfortunately have time to cover everything. So we're just going to hit what I consider the big ticket items that'll get us to our savings goal of over 10% savings. Connie, can you advance to the next slide, please? So the good news is that some of the proposals that did achieved energy savings actually did not receive public comments and will be in the 2021 IECC as part of the consent agenda. And so the ones I have in red here, for example, clarification and restructuring, this particular proposal did not increase efficiency, it added clarification. So there was a large proposal by the IECC SEPCAT committee that went through and took kind of got rid of the terms mandatory prescriptive, restructured the code. So I think it's going to lead to a lot of clarification and therefore better implementation, because if you can understand what's required, it's easier to implement. Fenestration efficiency that was submitted, this actually passed through without public comment. So the new fenestration U-factor requirements will be in the code, so it will result in increased efficiency. And then a proposal for high output service water heating equipment to actually increase the efficiency up to a 92% went through from 90%. And so that actually has a pretty good increase in efficiency for multifamily, where water heating load is a significant part of the total load of the building. Again, that received no public comment. And last but not least, the ASHRAE values for the lighting power density, both for whole building and also for space by space passed. And those did not receive any public comments. So those will be in the 2021 IECC. And again, that advances things in some case, well, certainly over 10% in lighting power density reduction. So it actually does a great job of representing what's currently being sold on the market right now for lighting technology, and increasing or moving the baseline to reflect the new lighting technologies that are out there as far as the lighting efficacies go. The other features, though, as expected, did receive public comments, and we're gonna hit on those. If you can go to the next slide, please. There were a series of proposals that were submitted by the Energy Efficient Codes Coalition. I'm missing one, CE69 at the bottom, but these particular proposals actually mined kind of the best values out of the ASHRAE process. They didn't bring over all the values from ASHRAE because some of the values would have actually resulted in reduction in efficiency. And as Eric had explained, the general goal is to increase efficiency in code without reducing efficiency, even though there might be some issues with consistency between the IECC and ASHRAE 90.1. The energy codes there's no requirement for consistency. There's no goal for consistency. Oftentimes, ASHRAE is mined for better values and for better technologies that make sense in the IECC, but sometimes the IECC is more stringent in values, and sometimes ASHRAE is more stringent in values. So this is a fairly typical process for doing this, but these particular proposals actually looked into the ASHRAE process and brought over efficiency levels that made sense for the IECC without weakening the other values in the ASHRAE in the IECC envelope tables. And so they did impact below grade walls, mass walls, as you can see on the slide, joist and framing efficiencies, and also unheated slabs. And if you can go to the next slide. What we would like to see, you can see on the proposal that I have the votes for all of these proposals that went through, and you can see that they all passed unanimously by the committee. There were a few dissenting votes as you go down through there, but from our perspective, based on the review of the public comments, we feel that these all should go in as submitted as the committee actually voted them in. So they're important. They have good energy savings, and they make sense for the IECC to advance the code forward. So these are our recommended public comment votes as if you're looking for recommendations. If we can go to the next slide, please. As far as I indicated earlier, there was a proposal that went in that actually increased the efficiency for fenestration U-factor. Another proposal went in to increase the increase the efficiency for solar heat gain coefficient. So you can see there was kind of two major changes on here. One is that it eliminated the orientation specific requirements for solar heat gain, and it changed it from fixed to operable windows. So that was kind of the first major change. So the format change, and then it also reduced overall the solar heat gain coefficient values for all the window types, regardless of whether or not there are projection factors over the windows. So this again, what we've been told and what we've seen is solar heat gain coefficient values, lower values in commercial buildings make sense just to be able to reduce the cooling loads. So this does a good job of overall of actually reducing these values to appropriate levels. There was one public comment that was submitted that actually would increase the one SHGC value in climate zone 1 to from a 0.21 to a 0.23. This is currently under review right now, and we don't have a position on that particular one. But overall, we thought that this was a good overall increase in efficiency for the building. If we can go to the next slide, please. So the next particular slide is dealing with envelope leakage. And there were 3 proposals that went in. The first proposal actually required testing for Group R and Group I occupancy. So Group R would be high-rise, mid-rise to high-rise multifamily buildings. The next proposal that went in was one that actually required testing for all other commercial occupancies. And then the third proposal that went in was if you didn't test, you needed to do envelope verification to make sure that the air barrier was actually designed properly in the building to begin with, and then it was installed properly on site. This is to make sure that the air barrier as installed and if not tested actually meets the leakage rate specified by the code, which for all commercial would be a 0.4 CFM per square foot leakage rate. The Group R and Group I proposal actually proposes to put that to 0.30 CFM per square foot, and actually they've also modified what we're testing on here to look at a building enclosure area. The proponents in this case, in the reason statement, actually cite that this is consistent with USGBC's lead for multifamily mid-rise program and EPA's Energy Star multifamily high-rise program, and is also currently required in ASHRAE 62.2 2019, which is ASHRAE's residential energy code proposal. So there's a lot of consistency in going with enclosure area with the 0.3 leakage area. So the typical public comments that came out on this were focused more on word changes to make sure that there was some clarification on what was and was not required. We did review those. As far as the envelope verification, there was a modification on this particular proposal at the code action hearings that added the ability for the code official to actually do envelope verification, which was in our mind a very practical change, primarily because there are some rural areas or parts of areas of the country where we're not going to actually have the capability or the people in place to actually do envelope verification. So this does allow the code official to be able to test. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So after reviewing the public comments, we felt actually that the proposals as written were clear. That in general, the language was there that provided the exemptions that were needed to be put in place and actually directed the people to when testing was required and when testing was not required and what you needed to do if testing was not required for specific occupancy types. And then as far as the envelope verification requirement goes, we thought that the modification at the code action hearings was actually adequate to be able to address concerns of the proponent by adding the ability for the code official to submit this. So we are actually proposing that all of these be voted for as submitted, because again, these did pass unanimously all the way through. So, okay, if we can go to the next slide, please. This particular proposal for controlled receptacles, this is the third attempt to get this into the code, and there have been arguments that have come up as far as safety-related issues, because the past proposals actually would allow the uncontrolled receptacle to be put on the other opposite side of the room of where your desk and your workstation is. And so the complaint and the argument was that, well, people are going to daisy chain power cables from one side of the room to the other, and it's going to create a safety related issue. And these concerns were listened to, and the proposals were modified to be able to reflect that. to make sure that we could eliminate any potential safety issues that could be coming up with this. And actually, the city of Seattle came up with a good set of language that was submitted into the 2021 IECC code development process that essentially would have you have a split receptacle where the top part is hot and the bottom part is controlled. And these are going to be located next to your workstation. And if you do decide not to install it this way, the uncontrolled receptacle would be located within 12 inches of the controlled receptacles. So this essentially eliminates an issue, a potential safety issue that was obviously a very relevant issue. So it puts both receptacles close to the workstation. And so this one actually was approved. And it was approved by a vote to 10-5. There was some modifications on this particular one during the public comment process, but we felt that this proposal should go through as modified by the IECC Code Development Committee, and so we recommend right now that this is actually voted on as modified. If we can go to the next slide, please. So there was a sister proposal that was submitted into the residential provisions that Eric had talked about to actually increase the efficacy for installed lighting in mid-rise to high-rise multifamily, essentially all dwelling units. The proposal was to require 65 lumens per watt for lamps and 45 lumens per watt for luminaires. And these values were actually vetted by the lighting industry before they were submitted. They were vetted in the New York State code development process and stretch code development process. Similar values have also been, will be appearing in the Illinois Energy Code. They've also been vetted in the Washington State process. And also in the current Denver code development process right now. So everyone, in general, the 65 lumens per watt that seems to be a good, reasonable value. This eliminates the worst of the compact fluorescent lighting at this point in time. It's still, but it still allows a higher quality compact fluorescent lighting, and it recognizes the fact that the majority of the lighting being installed right now in residential to meet the high efficacy lighting requirements are LED lighting. The 45 lumens per watt, from the lighting designer standpoint, they were having issues actually getting higher efficacy luminaires, and so these are the fixtures where the light source, basically the lamp, is integrated into the luminaire and it's all one piece. So 45 lumens per watt seemed to be a reasonable value for these particular these particular type of fixtures, because it did address the lighting designer's issues as actually meeting this requirement. So that's why the 45 and 65 were selected. There was a modification that was accepted in the code development process that would actually allow lamps that are in kitchen appliances like range hoods and ovens and that type of thing to be exempted from this. There is issues with trying to design high efficacy lights in those particular fixtures, and so these will now be exempted from the 90% of the fixtures having to meet the high efficacy requirements. You won't have to account range hoods and ovens and refrigerators and things like that where there might actually be lamps in it, where it's difficult to meet these requirements. So this one, actually, the committee thought it was a good idea. They voted 14-1, and we are actually recommending that that this goes through as modified by the committee. If we can go to the next slide, please. So the C406 points option was a major restructuring of the current package options that we have in the code right now. The package options went through in the 2012 Energy Code with the intent that the goal was to be able to provide flexibility in increasing the efficiency over the prescriptive requirements of the code. And the current options right now are based on a package approach. So you select an option. whether it be lighting, high efficiency mechanical equipment, reduced UA for the building envelope, reduced infiltration. So right now there's currently 8 options in the energy code that you can select from. PNNL did a analysis of this as part of the Washington State Code development process, and they looked at all of the options and the actual energy savings for each of the options. And what they found on the chart on the right here is a significant disparity. And they did between options as far as energy savings. When this first went into the code, the idea was that each of the options were roughly going to be equivalent to about a 4% energy savings over the prescriptive requirements of the code. But based on occupancy type, based on measure, this chart actually shows really what the savings are. And so you can see, for example, the reduced infiltration values actually give you very little savings, whereas lighting power density gives you significant savings. And so the goal on the whole C406 points options proposal was to try to equalize this, to make sure that you're getting the same amount of savings across the board, and instead of doing it as an option package, doing this as a points-based option. So you would select a certain number of points for to be able to comply. And in this case, the proposal is for to select 10 credits. Each credit being worth 0.25% savings. So 10 credits would be roughly a 2.5% savings, which when the analysis was done was what was achievable across the board. So, and this actually created a level playing field now to make sure that that every building was actually getting 2.5% additional savings of the prescriptive requirements of the code. So as with any large restructuring proposal, once these series of proposals were actually voted in by the committee, and then afterwards, once the dust settles, PNNL and NBI and some others started to look at the values and to look at the proposals themselves, and realizes there were some things that needed to be corrected in order to make sure that this would work in the field, because it doesn't make sense to actually put in issues into a proposal that are going to have to be corrected later on. So we felt it was important to actually correct some of the issues that we spotted right away and submit some public comments to correct these. So if we can go to the next slide, please. This particular slide actually just kind of talks about the family of points options proposals that went into this. So a reduced lighting power density, and again, this went from a package to a points-based option, enhanced lighting controls, extra area daylight responsive controls, something new as far as efficient kitchen equipment. So these are the major items that went into what we consider the family of CE 218 proposals. If we can go to the next slide, please. So the first public comment that was submitted actually was to recognize the fact that there was more energy savings for heat pump water heaters in certain occupancy types. PNNL reran the analysis on here, and actually the credit for these values was increased for occupancy groups R, I, and E, and other occupancies. This particular slide that you're seeing right here, this table is for Group R and Group I occupancies. And so you can actually see that heat pump water heaters do actually save a significant amount of energy, and there's no reason to, they should be given the credit that they deserve in these particular occupancies. So CE, public comment 1 for CE 218 actually modifies this to adjust the credits upward to make sure that, again, heat pump water heaters are provided the credit that they deserve. If we can go to the next slide, please. Public comment number 2, when we took a look at the scope of the code and the fact that the points option even impacts low energy use buildings, where as a prescriptive, obviously the package options affected those buildings too, and the package options for low energy impact buildings, you could actually meet that by picking a lighting option, for example, and putting a lower lighting power density. when we started to look at the overall impact of the points option on low energy use buildings, we realized that we needed to make some adjustments into the charging language of CE 218 and the C406 points option. So the first the first part of this public comment basically exempts buildings in utility and miscellaneous group U, where it doesn't make sense to actually apply the points option to those particular buildings. We reduced the number of credits required for storage group S, factory group F, high hazard group H, and low energy buildings, as defined again in the charging language for chapter 4, and also equipment buildings that have their own special requirements that are also in the charging language of chapter 4. So we reduced those down to 7 credits. We thought that was achievable. So yes, they are low energy buildings. They are still covered under the code, but they are required to have a fewer credits to meet. And last but not least, and we think this is fairly important, is the recognition that for mid-rise and high-rise multifamily, when we started looking through the points and actually applying how could multifamily apply with the points options, there were some problematic climate zones. So climate zone 3C, 4B, 4C, and 5C. So there were some problematic climate zones as far as complying with the points options, as far as the ability to achieve some of the credits. So these were reduced to an overall 7 credits in these particular climate zones. And we think this was a practical change to make sure that multifamily could actually comply with this. So this does, again, reduce the number by 3, but we felt that this was something that should be done in these particular climate zones based on the type of technology being put into multifamily and the type of construction that multifamily is that you use for multifamily. So anyway, these are we feel very important to get in, and we urge support on all of these public comments, even though it will result in needing a 2/3 majority. If we can go to the next slide, please. Public comment 3 actually adjusted the credit for renewables downward. So while we increased the credit for heat pump water heaters in some climate zones, we're actually reducing the credit. Again, this was based on further analysis. So in groups, group B, R, I, E, M, and other occupancies, there was a downward shift for credit for renewables. Again, this was just based on PNNL adjusted technology. And again, this is another important public comment to get in. If we can go to the next slide, please. Let's see, one more down. There are other public comments that are submitted in what we consider the family of CE 218 points options proposal. There were one public comment submitted for CE 226, which actually allows credit for reducing lighting power densities by either 10% or 15%, and also allows credit for high efficacy lighting in group R occupancy. So you can go up to 95% high efficacy lighting and take a credit there. This is an important one to put through as modified by the code action hearing, so that which was what was passed about 15-1. CE 229 was disapproved by a vote of 14-1. There have been modifications made to this particular proposal, and it's for enhanced lighting control requirements. The public comment makes sense, and we are full support of public comment 1, and we feel that should be voted vote for public comment 1 as modified by the public comment. And then CE 240, there was a public comment for, I believe, disapproval on CE 240, which actually allows credit for commercial cooking appliances. We felt that this was a sound proposal going forward, and we felt that this should be approved as submitted by the committee. It's something commercial kitchen appliances use a significant amount of energy, so if the appliances are efficient, we can actually save quite a bit of energy within the occupancies that would actually use this. So those are we felt that was an important proposal to actually get into the code. Okay, that is it for the CE 406 type of points options. If we can go to the next slide, please. So there were a series of proposals submitted by New Buildings Institute and others for what we consider ready and resilient. And this is from a New Buildings Institute stance. We right now our push is efficiency first and then add renewables. We don't want to reduce the efficiency of buildings as trade-off to renewables. So we really are strongly focused on getting the building efficient first and then adding renewables onto this. There's a few proposals that were submitted by New Buildings Institute that actually created kind of a responsible platform for bringing in renewables into the code as it went. And part of these are making sure the renewables are defined properly. There was a proposal that was submitted to on both the residential and commercial side to define renewables that actually was passed, and I do not believe there's any public comments on those. There was one proposal that went through that actually was not approved, and I have the number wrong up here, that defines biomass gas and biomass waste, and this should actually be CE 21, not CE 162. So we have a public comment was submitted on here to modify the definition, and we felt that was it needs to be defined in the code. So public comment 1 was submitted to modify that. There was also a proposal that gets to our efficiency first, then adding renewable, which is CE 53, which actually would require renewables to be installed on commercial buildings, not to get down to zero energy use or net zero, but actually just to put in, to kind of phase in renewables on commercial buildings as a start, with the realization that, we can't, if we want to get to zero energy, we can't all of a sudden just start requiring renewables on buildings. We need to kind of phase these in because it is going to take time to do that. ASHRAE has a very similar proposal in ASHRAE 90.1. This is actually taking the ASHRAE proposal, modifying it so it fits well into the IECC, but it does require a certain amount of renewables to be put onto commercial buildings. There are exemptions built into this where it's not feasible to actually do this based on roof structure, based on how much equipment is on the roof or the roof gardens and that type of thing. So there's some very practical exemptions built into this proposal. This was actually modified to reflect some industry comment and input, and also to reflect some of the provisions in ASHRAE. So we are actually supporting our public comment 1, which was modifying by our public comment. And if we can go to the next slide, please. There's also in the appendix that we currently have right now in the IEC, the 2018 IECC, there's an appendix for solar ready. We had proposed solar and storage ready to make sure there was actually a space to put in storage. We actually asked for disapproval, NBI asked for disapproval on this particular proposal so that we could work and collaborate with industry to make sure we got the language right. So we modified this to actually reference the International Fire Code, which was an important missing piece of this, and also NFPA 70 section 110-26. So this has been modified now to reflect these particular codes and standards, and we feel that CE 262 with public comment 1 should move forward and should reflect industry issues to make sure that not only are we making sure that solar can be installed on buildings after the fact, and there's chases and things like that to be able to run conduit up to the roof or whatever your renewable is going to be, but there's also adequate space in the building for storage, and this is kind of a key critical piece to this. So anyway, our recommendation again is to support our public comment 1. And if we can go to the next slide, please. This particular CE 217 was a part 1 and part 2. Eric talked about this in part in the residential. This actually did pass in the commercial provisions of the code, and EV ready and capable right now are being addressed in several states and in several code development processes. This has just recently gone through in the city of San Jose, for example, passed by city council on Tuesday night. So this is a major effort. This particular proposal was modified slightly in the code action hearing process to go from a 45 to a 50 amp circuit requirement. But we feel confident that this actually reflects kind of the, based on a review of other ordinances that are out there within cities, that we feel that this actually reflects a very realistic way of implementing electric vehicle ready and capable electric vehicle ready and capable ordinance into the code. So we felt very comfortable that this was a good first step. So and again, this we urge your support on 217, but we think that this is definitely the way to go and reflects the amount of electric vehicles that are currently being sold in the U.S. right now, and for now and into the future. So with that, Amy, I will turn it back to you for questions.
Great, thank you, Eric. So we did have one clarification regarding CE 218, the public comment 3 on CE 218, which would actually make it easier to use the renewables on high-rise multifamily, because that, when there's a reduction in the points for renewables, there's a reduction in the installed watts. So that's one way to get points for a smaller installation. So, so I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. We have some other questions here, and they're kind of process related. So, one of the questions that was, pretty simply, how does the voting work with the committee recommendation rule and the 2/3 override? So I was hoping one of you could jump in and explain the process quickly.
I'm going to punt to Bill or Eric on that one. So I think they have the best understanding of how this process works. So,
Eric, do you want me to start? Basically, here's what's going to happen. The public comment hearing is where they're going to set the ballot that will be the online ballot that will occur. There will be voting that will be conducted in Las Vegas at the public comment hearing by governmental officials. And so one of the reasons the IECC is encouraging governmental officials to attend the Las Vegas hearing is because they not only will vote, but they'll also help us determine the ballot that's going to be the online ballot that we'll see in November. And since the IECC will publish the results of those votes, it will help influence those people who are voting online who aren't in Las Vegas. And so they'll at least, when they go into the into the CDP access, which is the website that allows them to vote, they'll be able to do that. Now, what basically will happen, and I understand that even if you vote in Las Vegas, you can change your vote all the way up to the closing of the online voting window in November. And so then after the public comment hearing, the ICC will will publish its ballot. It will publish the results of the recommendations and the debate and everything that went on there. And then it will prepare for the opening of that window, which, as I said, we may open on the 13th of November and may close on the 27th. They sometimes extend it longer than 2 weeks, oftentimes because they've scheduled it right around the Thanksgiving break, and so they're not getting the kind of response that they should have, and it's kind of hard for people to vote. We are suggesting that governmental members gather all of their 4, 8, or 12 voting representatives into a room and vote together. We will have our voting guide out. We will be, EECC will be doing webinars. We'll be doing updates. We'll have a response team available if you have any questions that are out there. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised to see the Boston City Council put out another YouTube video that shows them voting. We do know that you'll notice that a lot of the recommendations that we had, the top priorities that the two Erics just discussed, have they aren't, you know, it's not like RE 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's going to be like RE 12 and RE, you know, all these others. I understand that it's very easy for a governmental member voting representative to navigate within the CDP access to make sure that they're voting on proposals that are out there. And so that's kind of I hope that answers the question, but if it doesn't, give me other details.
So what
Other
about
questions?
does the committee recommendation rule unless they're, you know, and how does the 2/3 override work?
Eric Lacey, am I correct that if the governmental officials that are the governmental member voting representatives that are in Las Vegas override, doesn't that become the prevailing motion, or is it the prevailing motion the recommendation of the committee?
So it's complicated, but kind of the bottom line is there's always an opportunity to disapprove something. So one of the possibilities is always going to be to disapprove a proposal, whether a committee voted in favor of it or not. What's going to happen is at the public comment hearing, the committee's motion is the standing motion. It's the one you start with. If the committee's motion was to disapprove, you have to override that motion to open up debate and to have, you know, to make other changes to the proposal and so on, is my recollection of that. If the committee's recommendation was as submitted or as modified, that's the starting motion, and you can start adding modifications to it or whatever, or you can get up and try to get people to vote to disapprove. But by the end of the public comment hearing, voters will have basically two choices on every proposal before them. You always have the choice to disapprove. Whatever changes are made to the proposal, there's always an option to disapprove. The other choice you have is whether to approve it as submitted, as modified, or whatever, but the option, you know, that you're voting for will have been set at the public comment hearing. So in other words, if RE1 is heard at the public comment hearing, and attached to it now is public comment 1, and everybody in attendance at the public comment hearing agrees that public comment 1 should be attached to proposal RE1. That proposal would go forward as RE1 as modified by public comment 1, or disapprove. Those would be the only two options available to the voters. So like Bill said, it's important to be there if you can at the public comment hearing to make sure that what is presented to the voters is the right version of every proposal.
Okay.
And I should point out that our voting guides are going to show both, you know, we'll have a comprehensive voting guide that will show all the public comments before the public comment hearing. It'll show all of them and whether we like them or not, and how we think that the voting should proceed in Las Vegas. And then the day after the ending of the public comment hearing, we'll a couple of days later, we'll be distributing that voting guide that tells you on those two votes that you have, disapprove or the other option that's available to you, which one we think you should do.
Okay, that helps answer another question, which was, will there actually be multiple versions of the voting guide? So it sounds like one prior to the public comments and one after the public comment, after the hearings.
Yeah, and I'm really excited about that because I will tell you one thing, the efficiency community is united behind a single voting guide, and so is the U.S. Conference of Mayors. They mentioned our voting recommendations, and we're such a diverse and broad-based group, and I got to tell you, our technical committee is the finest I've ever seen. I'm not one of them because I don't know the technical stuff, but these two Erics are unbelievable, and I think that what you're going to see in the recommendations are going to be all pro-efficiency. The Massachusetts Energy Office once did their own voting guide. and of 300 proposals, they disagreed with us on one of them, and they said that it wasn't a very significant one. So we do kind of hold as a badge of honor that we really do get it right in terms of telling you what's going to boost efficiency and what isn't. So it's we'll make it as easy as possible, and there should only be one voting guide from the efficiency community. It's just that we will have an abbreviated version of those top priorities, for those people who don't have time to cast 300 votes. And then that'll tell you about the most important ones. It'll probably be about 40, 45 votes. And then there will be another comprehensive guide that has all of the proposals that are up there, and it'll be more in depth than the abbreviated voting guide of top priorities.
Right, and that one will be able to show a little bit more about the rationale and the value of those different proposals. So.
Yes.
Very good. Well, I'm seeing we're right about time, so I would like to thank all of the presenters and all of you for participating in the workshop. Please stay tuned. We'll send you the recording of this tomorrow, and you can share it with others and encourage you to check back in for these voting guides and fact sheets. So thanks so much for making sure you get your voters validated before Monday, and we look forward to talking with you next time. Thanks so much.